By the way, there was like an editor of the San Francisco Chronicle had an event and said that my biggest problem is getting you all to give a shit about what happens here. And like when talking about you all, it was a bunch of techies because the techies sort of, some of them didn't live in the city, some of them were kind of transient.
Totally. Yeah. So there's this whole set of factors that have drawn our, Eitan Hirsch calls it like political hobbyism. It's sort of like you're college educated, you pay attention to politics like you and I, Andrew, pay attention to NBA basketball, right? And our fanship for NBA basketball is very personally fulfilling, and sometimes it's painful if our teams are losing, but like it's not really affecting the outcome of the game.
It's not? No, I'm kidding.
Wait, what? I thought if I wore this shirt unwashed for a third game in a row.
Yeah. My superstitions are not affecting this playoff series.
So one of the sort of kind of, I guess, implicit things going on in the abundance movement generally, and Abundance Network specifically, is saying like, actually do stuff that's going to connect to outcomes. And if you're clear-eyed and realistic about that, that's going to start at the local level. And it just plugs people back into like an older school version of like being a citizen, like actually participating, right? Like, we are part of a democracy.
Were you surprised at all by some of the critiques that Ezra and Derek received? I mean, it was interesting because like I in some ways, like who could be against government getting better at doing stuff? But then there were folks saying, oh, they missed the real issue, which is corporate power. And if you don't call out the bad guys, you're never going to solve it. And this is just
totally
reheated neoliberalism. Critiques that, by the way,
yeah.
I struck me as somewhat ideological and misplaced. But, like were you surprised at all, or what was your reaction?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. And I think on a couple different levels, like I think the way that Ezra has talked about it is that, even if the ideas aren't necessarily in conflict with each other, which I don't think that they are, I think they're quite compatible, sort of what you rank as maximally salient and sort of what's getting attention, energy, from elected officials, from donors, from media, et cetera, like that is more of a zero-sum competition. So I think that part of it makes sense. I also just, there's this phrase that Zach Exley, who is was one of Bernie's kind of guys, told me about a few years ago that stuck with me, called schismogenesis. And it's basically this idea that like we are just programmed for tribalism and us versus theming, right? If you think about like some bad war, I don't know, Serbia and Croatia going to war, like they speak the same language. They're like basically the same people, but it's like because they're so close, they fight. And so I think that some of that is just natural in the human condition.
I'm going to blame every negative comment I ever get now on schismogenesis. I'll be like, oh, stop being so
schismogenic. Yes. Yeah, I think it's very just normal human. I think, it's funny, I'm seeing Chris Hughes in a couple days, and I think a lot of his ideas around market crafting and, a lot of the anti-monopoly, there's power just overexerts itself in systems, and whether it's corporate power or professional trade association power or, union power, it depends on the context. It can all be corrosive.
Well, one of the things I love about what you guys are doing too, because like you have these, in my opinion, somewhat inchoate and incompatible critiques of government. And Mark Dunkelman talks about this, but it's like, hey, we are worried about government becoming corrupt and all powerful. And also, we don't trust government to do anything because it sucks so bad. It's like, like some of the failings now where it's like we kind of want government to be good at, for example, building housing or cleaning the river or building the train or whatever it is. And you've had this reflexive negativity towards government that actually is going to hurt the people who are on the outside looking in. I think you and I share a vision about the fact that our economy natively will become very unwelcoming and inhospitable to a lot of folks as AI speeds up and the rest of it. And so in theory, you'd have government playing traffic cop, being like, okay, what's happening? But then we don't actually have that kind of government, and a lot of Americans wouldn't trust it. But what you're doing is trying to actually energize state capacity locally which will then end up building trust, and you're having people get their hands dirty and rolling up their sleeves, trying to make good things happen locally in a way that's very achievable. I don't know why you wouldn't just run for president and try and change it all here. Now, I mean, I'm obviously very, very into the local, grassroots driven, ground up direction, because not that I'm necessarily beyond taking a big swing at the top, opportunistically, but in the meantime, there's so many positive things we can do to put points on the board.
Yes. I remember when you were on the campaign trail and doing, well beyond anyone's expectations. And I remember thinking, in my gut, I felt like the reason Andrew's doing so well, it's not UBI. It is a certain humanity and just like empathy. And I think it's hard to not just tell simple stories. That's the default. And in a simple story, you just always have villains. But you're constantly just sowing distrust and cynicism, in the voter of the other team or the other person or the other candidate. And I think it's corrosive to the overall enterprise of having a high trust society, which enables everything else. And I feel like you were able to bring a certain, just like humanity, like it's hard, like all this stuff is hard, have respect for the problem, have respect for the people in it. Like nobody wakes up as a villain in their own story. Like everyone's, for the most part, doing their best. I think that's an important underlying value to this work, that in the absence of that, it's hard to make progress.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Please do hit like and subscribe, and hit that bell if you want to be notified every time a new episode drops. Thank you.